She cared for a silent patient for months. When he finally spoke, his first words were a confession that changed her life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow across the quiet rehabilitation ward. Room 14 was at the end of the corridor, tucked behind double doors that rarely opened without purpose. It was nearing the end of Emma's shift, and her feet ached with the weight of 12 long hours, but she moved with steady hands and a practiced grace. She paused outside the door, took a breath, then pushed it open. Inside, Luca sat as he always did, back straight, hands resting calmly on his lap, eyes focused on a point somewhere just past the edge of the room. He did not blink as she entered. He never flinched. He never spoke. Emma closed the door behind her with a quiet click and rolled the small medical cart to the side of his chair. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the lemon oil she had started using last month. He did not seem to notice it, but she hoped, somewhere deep inside, it offered something gentle. "Time for your dressing change," she said softly, more out of habit than necessity. She reached for the bandage kit, then knelt beside him and carefully began to unwind the gauze around his forearm. His skin was pale and cool, and the old wound, self-inflicted before he was transferred here, was healing but slow. She worked in silence for a while, the only sound the quiet rustle of fabric and the occasional beep from the monitor in the corner. Then, without meaning to, she spoke again. "You know," she muttered, voice low, "I would not mind so much that you do not talk if you would just stop staring like that." She paused, glancing up at his face. "It is like you are memorizing me or waiting for me to say something important. But you never blink. It is kind of creepy, honestly." She expected no response. She always spoke like this around him, half to herself, half to the stillness, but tonight felt different. When she met his gaze, something inside her skipped. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. They were not vacant. They were not lost. They were present. "God, you are doing it again," she whispered. "That, look." She reached up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, then returned her focus to the fresh gauze. "You do not talk, fine, but do not look at me like that, like I am someone you used to know." She blinked hard and kept working, but her hands had started to tremble. She cursed under her breath, not from anger, but from something else, an emotion she could not yet name. As she secured the final strip of bandage, her fingers brushed the inside of his wrist. Luca blinked. It was subtle, deliberate, not a reflex. She froze, her gaze shot up to meet his again. His expression had not changed, but the weight in his stare had shifted. It was like standing at the edge of something vast, like silence before a storm. Emma took a step back, her pulse thudding loud in her ears. She swallowed. "I do not know what you are trying to say with your eyes," she said, voice quieter now, more uncertain, "but if you are in there, you are scaring the hell out of me." Still, he said nothing, but something had shifted in the room. The stillness was no longer empty. Emma gathered the used supplies, packed them into the tray, and rolled it slowly toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle and glanced back one last time. Luca had not moved, but his eyes, those eyes, were watching her as if she had already changed something inside him. She stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her. And inside the quiet room, Luca finally blinked again. Emma did not become a nurse because she loved hospitals. She became a nurse because she knew what it was like to lose someone slowly, helplessly, while the system stumbled behind bureaucracy and missed calls. Her younger brother, Noah, had been the softest part of her world. Diagnosed with severe autism at a young age, he spoke little but loved fiercely. He hummed lullabies instead of singing them, drew pictures of trees with purple trunks, and clung to Emma like she was the only person who understood the language he could not speak. She had learned to read his silences, to fill in the gaps with touch, with presence, with the calm rhythm of her breath beside his. When he was 10, Noah had a seizure at home while Emma was babysitting. She was 16. The ambulance took too long, the dispatcher took too long, the hospital took too long. By the time her mother arrived, Emma was in the back of the ambulance, holding her brother's hand as the lights blurred through her tears. Noah died the next morning. It was ruled unfortunate and unpreventable. Emma never believed that. So she became a nurse, not to save everyone, but to make sure no one under her care would ever wait in silence, wondering if they mattered. She had worked in pediatric units, psychiatric wards, emergency triage, but it was the rehabilitation center where she finally stayed. It was not glamorous, it was quiet, forgotten, but it was where the long fights happened, where healing crawled instead of raced, where presence mattered more than procedures. Her shifts were long, her pay modest, and the weight of her own grief still lived beneath her ribs like a quiet ache. But she came in early and left late. She learned her patients' rhythms, their fears, their favorite songs. She ironed their pillowcases with her palms, brought chamomile tea in a thermos for the elderly woman in room 3 who cried at night. She wrote small notes, "You're stronger than you think," or "Hope is real even on bad days," and tucked them into dresser drawers like hidden treasures. She cared because it was the only thing she knew how to do. But with Luca, something was different. He had arrived 6 months ago, tall, silent, with unreadable eyes and scars that looked old and deep, even the ones not visible. His paperwork labeled him selectively mute, with post-traumatic stress disorder tendencies. He had not spoken a word since the fire that had changed his life. The details were sparse. No family visited. No one claimed him. His existence had become routine. Meals untouched, therapy sessions unattended, and a stillness that felt almost intentional. At first, Emma treated him like any other patient, routine check-ins, hygiene care, medication, but over time, she felt herself drawn in by the space he occupied. His silence did not feel like absence. It felt like waiting. She started speaking to him during tasks, small things at first, descriptions of the weather, what she had for lunch. Then stories. "My mom used to make soup just like this," she said one evening, as she placed his tray down. She would hum and stir like she was conducting a symphony. "I used to think the carrots danced," or while adjusting his blanket. "Noah used to hate having the window open. He said wind made the air feel too fast." She never expected a response. That was not the point. She needed to speak the memories out loud, and, in a strange way, Luca had become her tether to something unspoken. Each evening, before ending her shift, she would pull a chair beside his bed and tell him one small thing about her life. Sometimes it was trivial. "I saw a dog in a raincoat today, red, with matching boots. I think he liked the attention." Other times it was heavy. "I still blame myself. For Noah, even when people say not to, it does not go away." And Luca listened. Or at least he gave her the space to believe he did. That was enough. She did not know why she believed his silence was a choice, but she did. There was something in the way he tilted his head when she spoke, the way his eyes flickered when she laughed, as though he were storing every word in a vault behind his stillness. Emma did not think of it as therapy, it was simply what she did, because silence had once taken someone she loved. And now, she filled that silence one story at a time. Before silence took over his life, Luca Romano had a voice that shaped skylines. He was one of the youngest lead architects in his firm, known for his intuitive, human-centered designs. His buildings were not just structures. They breathed, curved, opened to light. He believed architecture could heal, that the spaces people lived in could change how they felt, how they loved, how they mourned. He had built community centers, libraries, art schools, but the last project he ever touched was the one that shattered everything. It was meant to be a modest housing complex, affordable, safe, elegant in its simplicity. He had overseen every line, every angle, every exit, except one. A miscalculation buried deep in the plans, a flawed ventilation route, a failed fire escape system. It was missed in inspection, missed again in construction, and then, one winter night, a fire started on the 3rd floor. He lost his wife, Clara, and their daughter, Mia, in apartment 3C. They were trapped. The news articles didn't mention his name. The city filed lawsuits. The firm went silent. The insurance companies did what they always do: paid, buried, moved on. But Luca could not. Not when every blueprint he had ever drawn now lived beneath the weight of 2 headstones. In the weeks after, he barely spoke. He refused legal counsel, therapy, family. He disappeared. When they found him, sitting on a park bench in the snow with frost-bitten fingers and soot-stained clothes, he had not said a word, just stared ahead, as if watching something only he could see. They brought him to the facility under voluntary psychiatric care. He never resisted, never explained. He simply stopped speaking, stopped reacting, existing as anything but a physical form. That was until Emma. She did not know who he was, what he had done. That made her different. She did not look at him with pity or anger. She just looked and spoke, as if her words were sunlight, and she was pouring them into his frozen chest, one quiet beam at a time. At first, Luca ignored her stories. He counted the ceiling tiles, traced the lines of the radiator with his eyes. But then something shifted. One night, she mentioned a dress her mother used to wear, green with sunflowers along the hem. Luca remembered Clara had one like that too. Not identical, but close enough to stir something ancient inside him. So he started drawing again. Not buildings, not blueprints. Images. A green dress with sunflowers. A steaming bowl of soup in a chipped yellow bowl. A little boy holding a paper bird. Details from the stories Emma shared so casually, so vulnerably. He sketched them on the backs of menus, patient feedback forms, blank pages he tore from the corners of staff bulletins. He never let anyone see. He folded each drawing carefully and tucked them into the bottom drawer of the cabinet beside his bed, beneath a stack of worn-out socks. They were not for the world, not even for her. They were a way to feel again. Every line was a breath. Every color, a whisper. He began to anticipate her shifts. He noticed the perfume she wore on Fridays, the slight limp she tried to hide when her ankle flared. He saw the way her hands moved when she told stories, like she was painting pictures in the air. Her kindness was not grand. It was made of small things, refilling his water glass with ice the way he preferred, placing a folded blanket over his knees without a word, adjusting the blinds so the light fell just right across the room. And somehow, little by little, the silence inside him softened. He was still a man who had caused a tragedy, still a man carrying grief like a shadow. But Emma, her presence, her voice, her unwavering belief in something good, had begun to draw lines in his soul again. And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe he was not completely beyond saving. The notice came on a Monday morning, folded neatly inside her staff mailbox like any other routine update. Emma opened the envelope absent-mindedly, sipping lukewarm coffee, her mind already on her patients. But as her eyes skimmed the words, her heart dropped. She was being transferred. The letter was formal and polite. Due to recent staff restructuring, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for reassignment to the Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Unit, effective next week. It was a promotion in name, a lateral move in practice, but it was not what she wanted. Not now. Her first instinct was to march into the administrator's office and protest, but the decision had been made. Her supervisor offered a congratulatory smile, mentioning how well she connected with patients, how much good she could do in the new unit. Emma nodded, said thank you, and walked out, blinking against the sudden sting behind her eyes. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, moving through her rounds like a ghost. But when it came time to visit Luca, something in her tightened. She entered room 14 as she always did, tray in hand, chart tucked under her arm. He was already sitting up, waiting. Emma smiled, but it was thinner than usual. "Hi, Luca," she said gently. "I brought your tea. Cinnamon. I know it's your favorite." He did not move, but his eyes followed her, steady, watchful. She sat beside him, as she had hundreds of times before. Her fingers traced the edge of the cup before she looked up at him, her voice quieter now. "They're transferring me to another unit. A pause. "I didn't ask for it," she added quickly. "But they say it's a good opportunity, more responsibility, new patients." Still no reaction. Emma chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You're probably thinking I'll be out of your hair." She waited for something, anything. A blink, a shift. Nothing came, so she reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. The cover was soft brown leather, corners slightly worn. She placed it gently on the bedside table beside him. "I wrote down some of the stories I used to tell you," she said. "Not all of them, but the ones I think you might want to read. Someday." She stood up, adjusted the blanket on his lap one last time, brushing invisible creases with trembling hands. Then she leaned down and whispered, barely above breath, "If there ever comes a day when you're ready to speak, I hope the first name you say is mine." She kissed her fingertips and touched them lightly to his shoulder. Then she turned and walked out without looking back. The door clicked softly behind her. Luca stared at the notebook for a long time. The room around him felt colder now, emptier in a way that was different than before. The silence no longer wrapped him like armor, it pressed in like a weight. Slowly, almost reverently, he reached out and picked up the notebook. His fingers ran over the cover, then opened to the first page. There, in her handwriting, was a simple message. Even silence can be full of love. He turned the page. A story about her brother, another about her mother's garden, one about a birthday she had spent alone, eating cake by candlelight and pretending it was enough. By the time he reached the end, his hands were shaking, and for the first time since the fire, tears slipped down his face. They fell without sound, carving a path down skin that had known only stillness. His shoulders trembled, but he did not call after her. Not yet. He pressed the notebook to his chest, as if it could anchor him to something that felt like hope. And he waited. Waited in a silence that had finally changed. It had been 23 days since Emma last walked the halls of the rehabilitation wing. The new unit was efficient, busier, more structured. She worked with charts and therapy schedules, medication regimens and patient behavior logs. Her coworkers praised her dedication, her calm presence, her golden touch with difficult patients. But Emma felt like she was operating at a distance, from herself, from her heart. Each day a small ache lived in the back of her chest. She carried it silently, until the message came. She was midway through reviewing a patient's cognitive assessment when her name was called over the intercom. "Nurse Emma Grace, please report to Ward 2, Room 14. It could not be. She blinked, slowly closed the file in front of her, and stood without a word. Her feet moved before her brain could catch up. The hallway felt longer than she remembered, the walls taller, the air heavier. When she reached the door, the same wooden plaque still hung outside. Luca Romano. A nurse met her at the door, her eyes wide, voice lowered in disbelief. "He spoke," she said, "just now. Said your name. And that he needs to speak to you. Only you." Emma's breath caught. Without waiting for permission, she pushed open the door. Luca was seated in the same chair, as if time had paused since she last left. But something was different. His posture was less rigid. His hands rested softly on his knees. His face, still lined with shadows, held something new. Peace. He looked at her and smiled, not wide, not bright, but real. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper. "Hi." His eyes never left hers. Then, slowly, his lips parted. "I heard you," he said, voice hoarse from disuse, like dry paper catching flame. "Every night." Emma's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the edge of the chair beside him, lowering herself gently, breath trembling. "You heard me?" she said, barely able to form the words. He nodded. Every story, every laugh, every silence. Her eyes filled, blurring his face into softness. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I couldn't," he said. "Not because I wasn't able, because I wasn't worthy." She shook her head gently, not understanding. "I need to tell you something," he continued. His hands gripped the edges of the chair now, knuckles white. "I was an architect," he said. "My last project was a residential building. It passed inspections. It had my name on every line. My wife and daughter lived on the 3rd floor." He paused, breath shallow. "There was a fire. Something failed in the design. People say it was the wiring, but I know. It was me. I missed something I didn't see. I should have seen." Emma did not move. She did not speak. She only listened. "They died," he said, voice cracking. "Clara and Mia, I buried them in winter, and I buried myself with them." His shoulders trembled, tears catching at the corner of his eyes but not falling yet. "I came here because I wanted to disappear, because I believed I deserved silence, that I had no right to speak again." He turned toward her, finally, fully. "But then you came, and you spoke, and sang, and told me about your brother, your mother, your birthdays, alone. You told me everything, without asking anything back." He reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out the notebook she had left. He held it carefully, like something sacred. "You said, 'If the day comes that I speak, I hope the first name I say is yours.'" Emma nodded slowly, the tears on her cheeks now flowing freely. He placed the notebook on her lap, then looked into her eyes, clear, unwavering. "So, here I am, saying your name." A silence fell between them. Not the kind that wounded, the kind that healed. She reached for his hand, took it into hers. It was warm, alive. "You are not your silence," she said, voice shaking. "And you're not the worst thing you've done." He looked down, voice barely audible. "But can I be forgiven?" She squeezed his hand. "You already are." It was a quiet afternoon, days after Luca's first words had unraveled the silence that had held him prisoner for so long. Emma returned to the ward more frequently now, not as his assigned nurse, but as someone who simply wanted to be near him. Their conversations were still gentle, sometimes sparse, but filled with more meaning than pages of dialogue. They sat together in stillness, shared tea, walked slowly through the gardens when weather allowed. One day, as she arrived with a book tucked under her arm, a nurse named Carla caught her in the hallway. "Hey, Emma," Carla said, catching her gently by the elbow. "There's something I think you should see." Emma tilted her head, curious. "What is it?" "Luca's art. He's been drawing for months. He never let anyone in the room, but this morning he asked if I could bring you." Emma followed without question. They passed through a corridor she had rarely entered, a quieter section of the facility used for creative therapy. Carla led her to a small room at the end, a door left slightly ajar. Inside, sunlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating canvases, sketch pads, and watercolor stains on the floor. It took Emma a moment to breathe. The room was filled with Luca's heart. Dozens of drawings, some framed, others taped loosely to the walls, surrounded her. Pencil sketches, charcoal portraits, soft pastels, and watercolors. But they were not random. They were familiar. She stepped closer to one canvas, her mother's smile, not from a photograph, but exactly how Emma had once described it, crooked on the left, with a dimple that only appeared when she was about to say something mischievous. Next to it, another painting, her childhood home, a pale yellow house with white shutters and a sagging porch swing. She had spoken of it once, offhandedly, during a night when she was too tired to guard her memories. Further down, the bakery from her hometown. She had described the scent of cinnamon rolls that drifted onto the sidewalk at sunrise. In the painting, the golden light poured from its windows like a beacon. Her hands trembled as she turned to see more. A charcoal sketch of a little boy holding a paper crane with wide eyes and a shy smile. Noah. Emma pressed her fingertips to her lips, trying to steady the emotion swelling in her chest. Then she saw it, the most breathtaking of them all, a portrait of herself. Not from life, not from a photo, but from memory. She was laughing, head tilted slightly, eyes half closed in joy. Her hand was mid-vesture, like she had just told a joke or shared a secret. She gasped softly. Every detail was tender. Her curls a little messy, a coffee cup in her hand, the crease in her uniform from long hours of work. Carla stepped back, giving her space. He drew them all while he was still silent, she said quietly. I'd bring him supplies and leave them here. He never said a word. But he never stopped drawing. Emma stepped closer to the portrait of herself, eyes brimming. She reached out and touched the edge of the canvas lightly, reverently, as if it were a fragile page from her own story. She turned slowly, taking in the entire room. Each drawing, each brushstroke, was a love letter written without words, and for the first time, she realized. He had been speaking all along. Through these drawings, he had answered every story she told. He had remembered the way her voice softened when she spoke of her mother. He had captured the bakery's windows from her imagination. He had drawn her brother's innocence from a single anecdote. And he had drawn her, fully, joyfully, at a time when she herself barely recognized that version. Her knees gave way slightly, and she sat on the wooden stool in the center of the room, covering her mouth with one hand as tears slipped down her cheeks. Not from grief, from being seen, from being understood in a way she had never imagined. She looked up as the door creaked softly open. Luca stood there, quiet, watching her. His eyes held something steady and vulnerable all at once. "You remembered everything," she whispered, voice trembling. He nodded. "I didn't know how to speak," he said, stepping into the room. "But I listened. I listened to every word. And I didn't want your stories to disappear." Emma stood slowly, walked toward him, and without hesitation, wrapped her arms around him. He held her gently, carefully, like something cherished. "You gave them back to me," she said against his shoulder, all of them. In that moment, words were no longer necessary. Everything they needed had already been said, in pencil, in paint, in silence made sacred. The sun had just begun to rise when Emma arrived at the gates of the facility, a small overnight bag slung over her shoulder, her heart a blend of nerves and quiet hope. Luca stood waiting, already dressed, his own duffel bag in hand. He looked different in the morning light, less like a patient and more like the man he might have been, or perhaps the man he was still becoming. She smiled. "Ready?" He nodded once, then glanced toward the open road. "I think so." They boarded a bus bound for the countryside, a quiet town 3 hours away, where Emma's mother had grown up and where the air always smelled like lavender and cut grass. Emma hadn't been back in years, not since her mother's funeral, but something about returning there with Luca felt right. A new chapter written in familiar soil. They sat side by side near the back of the bus. The hum of the engine, the low murmur of a few early passengers, and the gentle swaying of the road created a rhythm neither of them needed to fill with words. Emma leaned her head gently against the window, watching trees blur into watercolor. Luca sat with his hands folded in his lap, occasionally stealing glances at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Halfway through the journey, she reached into her bag and pulled out 2 sandwiches, handing him one without a word. He took it, smiled his thanks, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence. Then Luca spoke. His voice was soft, deliberate, but clearer now than before. "I still don't know if I deserve this," he said, eyes fixed on the rolling fields outside. This chance. There are days I wake up and forget what it feels like to be human, and there are nights I remember everything too clearly." Emma turned to him, listening. "I know what I did or didn't do," he continued. "The pain I caused, the people I failed, and I still carry it. Maybe I always will, but—" He turned to look at her now, really look at her. "I want to try." She held his gaze for a long, quiet moment, and then she reached out and gently took his hand. It was the simplest of gestures, yet it carried the weight of everything they'd been through, the stories, the silence, the sketches, the confessions. Her fingers wrapped around his with quiet certainty. "We've both been broken in ways we never asked for," she said. "We've both made mistakes, but maybe that's the point." He tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, smiling through the emotion in her voice, "we're not here because we did everything right. We're here because we're still choosing to heal, to believe, to love again, even if it's messy, especially if it's messy." He let out a breath that sounded like relief, like release. "Do you really think we deserve another chance?" She squeezed his hand. "I think we've already earned it." The bus turned down a long stretch of road lined with tall trees that swayed gently in the wind. In the distance, the town came into view, small homes with flower boxes, a white-steepled church, the bakery her mother used to take her to every Sunday. Luca looked out the window, then back at her. "I've never had a place to start over," he said. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice just above a whisper. "Now you do." They stayed like that for the rest of the ride, the countryside unfolding before them like a story waiting to be rewritten, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in shared sandwiches, long silences, and the soft promise of one more chance, not perfect, but real. 1 year later, the little town that once held Emma's childhood memories now echoed with new beginnings. In a sun-filled building at the edge of Main Street, nestled between the post office and an old bookshop, stood the Harmony Center, a small but growing space dedicated to art therapy for patients with PTSD and trauma conditions. Emma ran it with quiet pride, her heart fully in the work. She taught writing workshops, hosted reflection circles, and guided patients through expressive storytelling. But the most popular class by far was Visual Voice, led by Luca. Luca, who once lived in silence, now taught others how to speak without words, through charcoal, paint, wood carving, and color. He worked patiently with veterans, abuse survivors, children who no longer trusted language. He never pushed. He listened first. Then, gently, he helped them find their own form of release. They worked side by side, their lives no longer defined by what they had lost, but by what they were building, one canvas, one story at a time. Emma's small book was finally finished too, titled Stillness Speaks. It was a quiet compilation of stories, true, raw, and deeply human. Pages filled with moments of unnoticed kindness, of people who chose gentleness even when no one was watching. The opening dedication read, "For the first person who taught me that not all silence is emptiness. Some silences are full of love." The community gathered for the book's launch in the same space where patients now found healing. Folding chairs lined the center room, sunlight pooled across the floor, and the smell of baked apple tarts drifted in from next door. Friends, patients, and neighbors came. Many had never known what Emma and Luca had survived, but all had felt the light they brought. As the event began, Luca sat quietly at a small upright piano, fingers poised above the keys. He played something soft and slow, an original piece he had written for Emma. It was a melody without lyrics, just movement, memory, and grace. When he finished, Emma stood before the room with the book in her hands. She read the final passage aloud, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I once cared for a man who would not speak. For months I told him my stories, my regrets, my fears, never knowing if he heard me. But he did. Not only did he listen, he remembered. He gave me every word back, painted in silence. I thought I had been the one doing the healing, but the truth is, he had been healing me, in ways I never saw coming." She paused, scanning the room. Then her eyes met Luca's. He rose from the piano and crossed the floor to stand beside her. From his pocket, he pulled out a small hand-carved box. Inside was a wooden ring, simple, smooth, and warm with meaning. On the inside, etched in tiny script, were the words, "We chose again." He went down on one knee. The entire room held its breath. "If you can forgive me," he said softly, "can you love me again?" Emma's breath caught, tears brimming before she could stop them. She nodded, unable to speak at first, then whispered through the emotion, "Yes." Luca slid the ring onto her finger, and the room burst into applause. Some stood, some cried, all smiled. They embraced, not as two people who had found a fairy tale, but as two souls who had chosen to rise from ruin together. It was not a perfect love. It was something better, healed, honest, whole. And so, from shared silence to shared vows, Emma and Luca reminded us that even the most broken hearts can find their way back to hope, one word, one gesture, one act of quiet love at a time. Their story is not just about healing, but about choosing to believe in life again, even after loss. Because sometimes, the most powerful love stories begin not with a kiss, but with a whisper in the dark. If this story moved you, made you pause, or brought a tear to your eye, we invite you to be part of more moments like this. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every tale is crafted to touch your heart, uplift your spirit, and remind you that no matter how quiet the world seems, someone is always listening. Thank you for watching. Until next time, be kind, stay open, and keep your soul stirred.